everyone who's joining us now online, and to everyone, you have logged into the Deeper Insights Tech Canada webinar series. My name is Ruth Ann Marley, and as always, it is my pleasure to host this series. We want to make this series as interactive as possible, so please do use the Q&A box. Type in your questions, your comments, any feedback that you might have, maybe an experience that is related to what you hear today, because we want you to be involved in this as much as possible. It will be recorded and will be placed on our website afterwards. So if you have colleagues or other people who might have been interested in the content that you see today, that's where you will find it. And I'll remind you about that as we go through. So today, our guest is Gabriele Maussner-Schouten, and I apologize if my German is not as good. So thank you, Gabriele, for joining us. One of the reasons I asked Gabriele to come with us and present today is she has such a broad experience in both being a consultant, a coach, a manager. She has been there and worked with some of the top companies around the world in dozens of sectors. So her management and project management experience really spans the continuum. And she is going to lend us some of that acumen today. Her background is she does have an MBA and from Dalhousie and a business degree, and I'm not even going to try this, from the Technische Hochschule in Nuremberg, close, and in Germany. And she's been working with several companies, both Canadian and international. So right now, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to turn it over to you, Gabriele. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Ruthann. And I am so happy to be here and talk to you about my passion around project management. And I like to, hold on, let me just stop share and reshare.
Did it just get stuck?
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah. I like to share with all of you. Well, first of all, I like to start off with a quote. And the quote is from Joe Gomez. And what he said is, operations keeps the lights on. Strategy is a light at the end of the tunnel. And projects are the engines that get you there, that are driving your organizations forward. And I'm so excited to be here because I believe project management is misunderstood. And I like to talk to you about 3 myths that I'm encountering many times on my colleagues' perhaps misconception of project management. And I like to demystify them with you. And then I like to talk even more importantly about 7 power insights that I believe will help all of you to make your projects and your initiatives more successful and smoother. And the way I like to start off is I like to develop as a common ground, a common understanding of project management. So projects drive strategic execution. And this is very important to keep in mind. Projects need to deliver value. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. Projects always means that you're working with cross-functional teams. And what that implies is that project organizations are different from your organizational chart. And that in itself creates some challenges that we will talk about today. Projects have a defined start and end date. That is the most basic definition of any project. And this is my favorite, and I kept it to the end, is projects are where art, science, and craft meet. So there is not one way of doing it. It is always a triangle of all 3 disciplines. And before I get started now, I like to emphasize that this session is for you. And please, I'm very familiar with this topic, so you can interrupt or ask questions anytime. Ruth Ann will keep track of them. I also will have 3 times a break, and I will also let you know when that is, just also to answer your questions when it's fresh in your mind, or if you would like to contribute anything. So, and now I like to focus on the 3 myths. Myth number 1 is it is all about being on time and on budget. And this is even the PMI organization defined project management early on like this, is it's all about being on time and on budget. And what we have seen in the past is we delivered on projects that were on time and on budget, but delivered no value. And this is why I like to turn this around and like to say instead is delivering value within a certain time frame. Because it is project, it's all about delivering value for the organizations, pushing the organization forward. So that is myth number 1. Myth number 2, it is all about process and techniques. And when I teach project management courses, so often the first question that comes is, what is the best project management tool that is out there? What is it that I can do? And it's almost this idea on if I have the right tool, project management will just happen on its own. And it couldn't be any further from the truth. Then it's the idea of process. And all of us would kind of say, oh, we don't like process. But when we step back, is everything that we do, even the most creative idea process, is based on a process. And the basic process of project management has 4 phases. And those 4 phases are, it's your initiation phase is when you as senior leaders decide to move forward with a project. It is your planning phase on when you kind of figure out on how to get there. And then it's an execution phase, and quite often it's very iterative. And then at the end, you have your closeout when you actually deliver and when you operationalize it. So it's true, there is a process, but within that process, there is creativity, there is some experience, and most of all, there's ongoing learning. And it's so important that we see projects as a learning journey and less as a way of just following a process. So now I'm coming to myth number 3. And once I come to myth number 3, I just want to check in on how this resonated with you. So myth number 3 is project management is not my concern as a senior leader. I hire project managers to get the job done. I'm hiring the gun to move this project forward. And that is true. You are not responsible as a senior project leader for the execution of the project, but you are responsible to make those mission critical decisions to move the project forward. When I wrote a white paper last year on PMOs in Canada, and I talked to project management office leaders, and I talked to them about what is most important. And number 1 issue that always came up is I need my project executive, my senior executive, to make timely and sound decisions. The PMI organization is doing a survey every year on basically finding out what are the key areas why projects are failing. And admittedly, there's still a lot of failures out there. And number 1, every year, it's a lack of senior executive support. So I like you to think about this, and on thinking when you reflect on your projects is what is your role on these projects and what can you do to catapult them forward? How can you move those big boulders out of the way for the project team to actually do their jobs? So at this point, I just want to take a very quick break and just see, Ruth Ann, are there any questions, anything that the audience would like to add?
While I'm waiting for them to type in, I think you've really, you have nailed it there when you say, okay, any project is an interdepartmental agree, you know, you must have buy-in. It's never cross-functional teams. It can't be just one team, but to have senior management and senior leadership involved in it, and not just from, is it on budget and is it on time? What might be the barriers, what might be the opportunities that are being uncovered during the project that I think leadership by all means should be involved in, like you say, moving the big boulders, but also saying, hey, you guys discovered something, maybe you've hit on something new here.
Yes, absolutely, Ruth Ann, you summarized it perfectly. Are there any questions, anything else that's people have to add? Okay, so then I will move on, and there will be another round of times for questions. So this is setting the framework on project management, and that is the engine for your strategic execution. All your initiatives are based on the principles of project management. And the better and more fluent you get in the language, in managing projects, the faster you can run that racetrack. So let's start with those 7 power insights. And the first 3 are really geared towards that senior leadership that is so important for project execution. The number 1 is use your resources wisely, align your projects to your organizational strategy. And I cannot stress that enough. When I talk to organizational leaders, is what I hear consistently from tech members and outside is that we have so much going on. And sometimes the question is, do you have too much going on? And are you diluting your efforts? And here I like to quote Michael Porter, who is Harvard business professor, who said the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And what that alludes to is creating that focus in the organization. And we know the more focused we are, the quicker we can reach our goal and the more satisfying it is. So the first thing that I like you to keep in mind before you approve a project, is it aligned to your strategic plan? And is it the best way to reach your strategic vision? To understand that why early on of a project, the purpose of a project will be so important when you're in the middle of that project and you have to make those mission critical decisions. And when you can remind the project team on why are we here in the first place? And it will help you in decision making. The next thing I like you to keep in mind is that time is the only non-renewable resource that you have. All others you can replenish. Time you cannot. So when you agree on the portfolio of your projects that you approve for the next year, make sure that your time is spent wisely and that your teams spend the time the most efficient way possible. And here a little tip on watch out for STP. Well, you might ask, what is STP? Same 10 people. When I look at organizations and when I work on projects, there are always these 5 to 10 people that everybody wants on their project team. They are your high performers. They know your organization. They are motivated. You can rely on them to get the job done. They are the pillars of your organization. Make sure you use their talent and experience wisely, and that you don't put them in a situation where they have to multitask and in a worst case, burnout. The next one, power insight number 2, is the more complex your project or initiative, the stronger needs to be your executive sponsorship. So you might ask yourself, so, okay, what do you mean by complexity? And let me show you this grid that might help you to put it in perspective. So when we talk in project management or complexity, we quite often talk about 4 different quadrants. First one is change management. And this is about on how much change will there be for the organization, for different employee groups, or for a wider stakeholder community once that project is operationalized. Then the next one is number of stakeholders. And stakeholders are for sure your project team and most likely your employees, but they might also be your customers, your vendors, government agencies, interest groups, depending on the project. And as a rule of thumb, the more stakeholder groups you have with different needs and different communication needs, you have to keep that in mind, the more complex it gets. The next one is technical difficulty. Is this state of the art? Are you at the bleeding edge? And this in itself will make it more risky, more complex. And last but not least is experience. Has your team done it before? And the more experience you have, the less risky it becomes. The less experience your project team has, the more riskier, the more complex it becomes. So to put this a little bit more into something concrete is, when you look on the left, a potential ERP implementation, quite often that quadrant is quite big because it affects your organization, it affects your suppliers, it affects your vendors. It's lots of change management, technical difficulties depending on how many interfaces you have. And then quite often ERP implementations, you don't do them that often. So quite often your team is not as experienced as you would like it to see. So this would be a big area that would require significant executive sponsorship. In comparison, your annual report, your annual budgeting process, something that you do repetitively, it is something your organization is quite familiar with. And typically those projects are significantly smaller and they do not require as much of your executive sponsorship. Now I'd like to share with you a little bit on when I run this bigger workshop, I always ask, what worries you the most? And consistently, this is the answer I get from senior executives, is change management worries senior executives the most. And then between the experience of the team and stakeholder management is always, it fluctuates between 2 and 3. They rotate back and forth. And then last is technical difficulty. And I find that always insightful because quite often we first see a technical difficulty of a project when in reality, change management and all that soft side is far more impactful and inherits far more risks than actually the technical difficulty. So now we come to the last one, and I will have a checkpoint at the end of that as well, is ensure clear role definition and governance. Early on, we were talking about that a project organization is cross-functional. What does that mean? That means that your project organization is different from your organizational chart. Team members have different responsibilities on a project than what is documented as their job responsibility as part of their line management job. That in itself can create a lot of conflict. also what happens is with projects is, and this also has a nature that so much is going on within your organization, is that projects tend to expose departmental silos. What do I mean by that is, so here on the one hand, we have these project goals and a project team to drive it forward. And then quite often we have project team members that also have a responsibility to work on their line management responsibilities, and their boss is asking them to work on objectives that are directly related to departmental goals. And that it is not uncommon, are in conflict with actually the project goals and the project responsibilities. This is where a clear governance comes in. And one thing I always do early with my project teams is that we have a clear role definition around accountability and authority. So what roles do we have on a project? So first of all, there is that project leader. And this is the person, or project manager, coordinator. This is the person that leads, coordinates, communicates. That is the first person you go to when you want an update on a project. Then you have team members, and team members have to be specifically assigned to a project. And they have to agree to that they take on this responsibility within the project. This is very important because so often we just assume project team members know what they're responsible for and that they just do it. And there's so often a disconnect between the team members and the project leadership in terms of roles and responsibilities. So the more explicit you can be, the better off. Sometimes I ask my project teams to, besides doing a project charter, doing a team charter. And that refers to outlining who's responsible for what, how do we communicate with one another, and how do we resolve conflict. The last group that I like to talk about is the internal and external stakeholders. And it's very important to identify them early on in the project. So these are all the different groups that are affected by the project, either while it's going on or when the project is going live. A big group of that is for sure your employees. It might also be your customers and your vendors. And I like to share that little anecdote on ERP implementations, on how important it is to keep your customers and vendors informed as if you're changing payment processes or if you're changing on how your customers can pay you or how you pay your suppliers. You do not want to surprise any one of your stakeholder groups. So at this point, I like to take a quick break and I like to see what do you find in terms of when you lead your projects, what is on your mind?
I hope that we'll get some responses in there, but one of the things that you brought up there is, the exposure of departmental silos. What do you think one of the key drivers for creating silos might be?
Well, I think one area is that when I ask senior executives if they know of all the different projects that are going on, quite often they don't. And so department heads have their own initiative that they would like to drive forward and where they see benefits. And sometimes they're not communicating all of this as part of a senior management team. And it also comes back to this idea of the same 10 people. And organizations rely so much on that small team. And everybody is, it's like this pull and tack kind of a, when can I have that resource to drive my initiative forward? And Roseanne, the biggest thing is alignment, saying no to projects. And we don't do that often enough. Yet we know how detrimental multitasking is and having too many projects going on at the same time.
Excellent. So Julian has a question on something that you just brought up, and he said, could you share on a more granular detail about what you would recommend putting into a team charter? You mentioned 3 categories of information already, but can you dive a little bit deeper into that? So yeah, the team charter.
Team charter, a very good question is, first of all, you want to outline on who is part of the project and what their roles and responsibilities are. You want to outline on when you meet and how you meet. Because now we are living so much in a virtual world. So you want to outline on, do you have all your documentations on Teams? And what channels are you using? How do you organize all your project documentation? So you want to see how you communicate, when you communicate in person, and when it's okay just to shoot a quick text message. And then a big area is on how to address conflict. And we will talk about this later on a little bit more on how to create that safe space and how to manage these emotions and what you can do. This is so important, especially now we are so virtual. And quite often we walk away from a Zoom call and we said, whoa, wait a moment, I had one more question and everybody logged off. What am I going to do now? And so then how is it okay for us to have a follow-up conversation? How can we create that safe space? And what is so important is when you create that team charter is to doing it together. This is already half of the battle. And if something happens and you feel like the team is not performing, revisit that charter and thinking, are we missing something? What is not working with that team charter? How do we need to refine our contracting to work together?
Right. Well, I think you've touched again, communication cascades, and the vehicles for communication are critical within any organization, even outside of projects. But I think the other one is about the authority. When and where do people have the authority to make decisions, that it doesn't have to go up and down the escalation to higher leadership? Making sure that that's put into place well in advance too.
Yeah, and if I want to summarize what project management and leadership is, it is a no surprise management. And what that means is that your senior leadership team always is informed. And when you make decisions as a team, they are aware of what you have decided. And so often these miscommunications and these emotions rise up is because people are surprised. People assumed something that was not reality. Are there any other questions?
No, not at this point. We're going to let you carry on there. Thank you.
So the next one is, and it's my favorite one, is planning is everything and a plan means nothing. So you might think, well, what do you mean by that? Project management is all about a plan. And I counter to say is, it is all about planning, not the actual plan. So what do I mean by that is, and when you saw the map earlier, is what I always say is, when we do that initial planning is, you want to understand the map. You want to understand how, let's say you need to travel from from Calgary to Vancouver or from Toronto to Montreal, you want to understand your options. You want to understand the modes of transportation you can use. And within that, you want to understand the different ways. So by car, by train, you want to understand the timing, by bicycle, traveling by a highway versus the country road. You want to understand all of it and then make your decision on how you're moving forward. And I can guarantee you, as soon as you made your decision, as soon as you came up with your plan, after you understood everything, as soon as your plan is issued, it might already be outdated. This is why I refer to projects are a learning journey. And it is so important that with projects, we hold on to that vision because we know the project is important, but we are flexible in the approach. So the why of the project should not really change, but how we get there, how we meet that organizational need, that will certainly change. And then some of you might have heard of the different methodologies in project management, and we talk about agile, and it talks about a far more iterative process, which I think we always had all along. But there's one key rule that I always like you to keep in mind is you want to plan as early as possible, but to decide as late as possible. What does that mean is, so you want to understand the map, you want to understand all the options. But when you as a senior leader make a decision that is moving that project forward, very often you decide on a path. It is a fork in the road that the project team is moving forward on. And you want to give yourself as much time as possible to make a sound decision. Not too much time to hold the project team back and to affect productivity, but enough time to make an informed decision that will hold in the long run. Because there's nothing more demoralizing for a project team is when a project team needs to step backwards and needs to say, oh, we made that decision a month ago, and now we realize it's not working, and we have to backtrack. So what you want to avoid is backtracking, but you want to make that decision just before you need to do that. And then something else is you want to create value as early as possible. Look for those low-hanging fruits, because there is nothing more energizing and motivating for a team is when you can celebrate successes that have a tangible benefit for your organization. Look for them and plan your milestones around it and celebrate those successes. And this comes back to what we said earlier is you want to deliver value within the given time frame. So how can I deliver value early on? And this is a good discussion to have with the project team and to get the project team thinking around that. So, number 5 is use data and agree on how to measure progress. Now you might say, okay, Gabrielle, early on you said it is more about people and it is not so much about process. And there's definitely a component to it. The biggest thing is what I find when I work with organizational leaders and they give me their 1,000-line project plan and I see tasks that are green, that are yellow, that are red. And I'm asking, so how do you know if your project is on track? And quite often they don't know. And this comes back to defining milestones that you know that you are moving forward. Because especially as your projects get so big and you have thousands of tasks, you don't know which ones again need to be on track for you to reach your project milestone. So this thinking through on what are your critical milestones and what do you need to get there is one of your most important communication tools. In the initial phases, also, you want to gather as much data as possible. This might be operationalized data that you're saying, okay, what is my throughput? And where do I want to get that? How many customer service calls do I answer right now? And how many do I want to answer with a new system? And what do I need to have in place to get there? So those are quantitative data that provide insight. I also want to put your emphasis on qualitative data, on what you think about a project. What are your assumptions? And what do you believe is happening? Sometimes those data are just as important as the quantitative data. And you need them to manage risk and to have those open discussions to develop good risk mitigation strategies. And here I like to share again a technique that that I use quite often, and I find great resonance when it comes to risk management, and that is a pre-mortem. You hear correctly, not a post-mortem, a pre-mortem. And what I do with my project team and also with the senior leadership team is I ask them, imagine the project is finished and is a complete success. Why do you think it was a success? And I ask the teams to brainstorm with themselves first, and then we brainstorm as a group and we gather all the feedback. And quite often it provides interesting insights, especially around team dynamics. Then I do the opposite. And I ask the project team and the senior leadership team on, imagine it is a complete failure. And why do you think it was a failure? What do you think went wrong? And then we brainstorm around why it was a failure. And quite often, what bubbles to the surface is cultural issues, challenges around authority that help then inform the project team and help the leadership team to be proactive around those areas. So risk management is, on the one hand, is defining with your data on what can go wrong and having those risk mitigation strategies, but also use a pre-mortem to dig deeper and find other areas that might stand in your way. And look at your past projects and learn from your mistakes and your successes. But most of all, agree on how you measure progress. And this is something you need to report consistently on. And if a milestone doesn't make sense, make sure that the entire project team agrees that this might not be the right milestone anymore, and you agree as a team on what your new milestone is. So now we are coming to number 6. And number 6 is going more into the human side. And it goes into team dynamics. It goes into how we create an environment, a climate within our project that helps us to succeed. Right now, there's a lot of buzzwords on learning from failures. I don't like this, and I tell you why. It's because nobody likes to admit to failures. We are not wired that way. Our armors go up. And so I like to refer more to a learning environment instead of this idea of failing fast. And the basis of this is trust. And I like to share with you a little anecdote is because right now, and especially as we're coming out of this pandemic, there is the race for innovation. Who can come up with the next big thing? And Google, relying on innovation, studied all of their high performing teams, and they thought, okay, what is there? What can we do to basically understand the key performance indicators of these high performance teams? The project name for that was called Project Aristotle. And so they were looking for correlations, and first they couldn't find it. And then they finally came to an area that allowed them to find that correlation. And that correlation, what they all had in common, was to create that psychological safety, that deep sense of trust that everybody felt they were a part of the team and they were heard. So yes, there are 4 pillars to it, and that is your structure, that is what is my impact on the project, why am I doing the project in the first place, and overall my role, that is important. But the icing on the cake, what set the project apart, is to create that psychological safety, to create that trusting environment. So how do you create that? What can you do as a leader? And on the darker shade of the gray is around what you personally can do. And the first one is credibility, is tell the truth and admit when you don't know something. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. As a matter of fact, you should not be the smartest person in the room, because everybody on your team should have their area of expertise. And then there is a reliability piece. And this is that your actions match your words. If you agree to make a decision by a certain time frame, make that decision. Explain how you came about that decision. And if you think you're responsible for something, most likely you are, and take the bull by the horn and execute on it. So this is your own actions. The lighter shade of it is on how you think of your team and how you always watch yourself, that you make sure that that the team is perceiving you in the way you want to be perceived. So how to do that is extending trust to others, making sure everybody has a voice, and making sure that everybody gets a chance to talk and that their points are taken. There's a little secret. When somebody makes a point, always find at least 10% good in it. Even if you think, oh my God, this was ridiculous, find those 10% and build on it. Because you never want to contradict somebody in a public setting. You always want to find that good piece and move forward. And this is perhaps the reason why I use the word "and" so much, is because you don't want to use "but." It's so often proven when somebody makes a comment and somebody else says "but," quite often the conversation becomes very negative. If you replace it with "and" you build on the idea, suddenly your conversation, your brainstorming becomes far more positive. In my research and also in my coaching training, we talk a lot about NASA, and we researched on how NASA is forming teams and how NASA is creating these productive team environments. And then there's a quote I like to that resonated with me and resonated often with my project teams is, we do not punish mistakes, but we punish the concealment of mistakes. And I believe that gets to the heart of it. We need to create an environment that our team members feel safe enough to share with us when something didn't go well. Because those are the things we need to know. It's almost like Bill Gates said, I don't need to know the successes. I need to know the things that haven't gone well, because that's where I need to act. So at this point, I want to check in before I come to point number 7 and see if there are any questions.
Thanks, Gabrielle. One question did come in, and it's more of a comment. Narja said that in their experience, they used RACI, the RACI charts as a tool. And I know that you've talked about, the tool isn't the project, but perhaps you can touch on a few tools that help people to build in those milestones for, we reached a success point at this point, because I think that a tool might be a good way of putting that in.
So first of all, I'm a firm believer that when you're in the planning process, you cannot do it without a work breakdown structure. And what is a work breakdown structure? It is basically breaking your project down into smaller pieces. I like to do that with my team. It's always a team exercise, and we go down to 2 or 3 levels. And what that gives you is, it gives you 2 things. First of all, at the beginning of a project, all your team members look at it from a different angle. This is almost like when there's this picture of somebody sees a 9 and the other person sees a 6, because they're standing on opposite ends of the number. Both of them are correct. And what a work breakdown structure does, and working through it as a team, is to create a shared understanding. What that also does is, as you're defining your project, it ensures completeness, and together you define those milestones. That is so critical. What you can also do is, and this is, you can refer to projects that perhaps you have executed in the past, or your vendor has executed for you in other organizations, and you can look at their structures and their milestones, and you can learn from them. So what the work breakdown structure does, it's team learning, it's understanding each other's strengths, because there's quite often discussions on the project team, and people see risks differently, people see opportunities differently, people see scope differently. And what all of that does is create that common understanding. And I venture to say one of the biggest risks that you can have on a project is if your project team does not have a joint understanding of your project. So this exercise, I insist with all of my project teams to go through and to create that understanding, and sometimes step back and do it in the middle of a project again when you reach a critical milestone. But out of that initial structure come your critical milestones. What also comes out of this is that you inform your senior leadership team on where you need their support. And this is also where you put your governance in place. So you're talking about when you're going to meet with your project team. Is it daily? Is it weekly? Is it bi-weekly? Is it monthly? When are you meeting with your senior management team? And how are you going to communicate with them? So those are critical. Having said that tools are not important, of course, I would say most project managers have their favorite tools, and there are lots of them out there. The key thing with tools is that they can be tremendously powerful if everybody knows how to use the tool. So when you have a tool, if it is Smartsheet or Microsoft Project or Monday or Basecamp, whatever it is, or Jira, make sure that you have at least one person on your project team that is very familiar with that tool. Because quite often project team members don't want to update a status because they're afraid to touch the tool. So you want to avoid that, and you want to keep the learning curve as short as possible.
Good. Well, and thank you. And I think, you've really touched on it, is that this whole project management is about people and empowering and, making sure that their voices and their strengths and their skills and that psychological safety is there. So carry on.
So I like to come to the last part, and this again speaks to why I don't emphasize so much the tool piece on it, is that research has also shown is that miscommunication and negative emotions are up to 50% of your project cost. So this touchy-feely thing that sometimes we want to push aside, yet it is so important to reach our project goals. So how do we accomplish this? The first one is that we want to speak the same language. We want to speak within the team and among the stakeholder communities. I have to say and I work more on the information systems projects or on communication strategies. Is every vendor has their own communication terminology, their glossary almost. Every organization has a different way on how they define terms. I'm a big proponent to establish a common set of vocabulary. I cannot tell you on how many times we have heated discussions with vendors on various approaches just to realize that process testing, the term process testing meant something very differently to me than to my vendor. And the more you can define those key terms early on and ensure that there's a common language throughout, the more successful you will be and the less misunderstandings you will have. Quite often your stakeholders might have a different language. So there is a language of your project team and as you're implementing, and then your stakeholders might have a different language, especially when it comes to terms like invoices, payment terms. All of this is make sure you understand the language of your stakeholders and you communicate in that language. Sometimes it's good to test it out and to see, did my message actually did it get received the same way as I meant to send it? This is Simon Sinek says this quite often on saying, don't communicate what you think, communicate what you mean. Well, it's easy said, it's hard to be done. And this is where we need those feedback loops to understand is, did our message resonate? Be aware of your emotions and that your emotions can catapult your project team forward or can hold the project team back. The more open and honest your communication is, the better it is. Don't be afraid to use humor. Sometimes when you have those long days and you need the full attention of your project team, sometimes humor or food will help you to get that attention that you need. And the reason why I refer to food is when I talked to a colleague of mine and she is responsible for a huge portfolio. And she said to me, Gabrielle, I have saved so many project deadlines with a bag of almonds. And how did she do that? Well, she went up to the person and said, hey, what's happening? What's going wrong? How can I help? And over a little chat, they solved an issue. In our virtual world right now, this might be harder, but you might be able to schedule that virtual walk or that virtual coffee to understand what is bothering one of the team members. Don't underestimate that one-on-one interaction. And if you cannot be in the office together, create those one-on-one situations where somebody can be completely open. Also, and we found this so much through the pandemic, is many of us are torn into different directions. We have our personal needs. We might have to take care of a loved one. We have to know about this, understand it, and work around it. So the better you understand the emotions and the less there is a grapevine, the better off is your project team. And then last but not least, watch out for two emotions, and they have such a detrimental impact on your project team. One is blame. Watch out when people start blaming one another. That's a sign that there's not the accountability that you're looking for. And the other one is anger. Anger is one that derails a project team. It might be because somebody talked over somebody in a team meeting and somebody felt not being heard. And suddenly, instead of worrying about project deliverables, they are completely derailed and think about this person and why that person did not respect them. So this brings me to the end of my 7 key insights and my 3 myths. And before I wrap it up, I'd like to hear any more questions, and then I'll have a final thought for you.
You know, Peter wrote in, and it was so true. I resonate with this as well. Peter said, I really like the seemingly simple statement, we don't punish mistakes, we punish the concealment of mistakes. And, you know, that really is a beautiful sort of soundbite capsule for any project there. So thanks for thanks for bringing that up.
So if there are no other questions, what I want you to leave the senior management team with the PASS framework. And PASS is like passing through the project. P stands for propel. You need to propel your project team forward, moving those big boulders along. You need to remove those big boulders. A stands for align. Your project objectives need to be aligned to your strategic strategy. If it is not, you will find yourself in the middle of a project thinking, why are we doing this in the first place? And perhaps we need to stop this because it was not so important in the first place. There is nothing more expensive than a project that is not finished. The first S stands for support, and that is the internal support for the project team that you want to give. You want to coach, mentor, you want to be there visible for your project team. And the second S stands for show, and you want to externally show your support for that project. And you want to be the biggest cheerleader of your project. So thank you very much for this session. I hope this was helpful. And this brings me to the end.
Thank you, Gabriele. I do want to let everyone know online that Gabriele is a TEC speaker. So this is just a bit of a snapshot, a condensation, condensed version of what her workshop is like. So you can book Gabriele to come into your meeting, and hopefully you can see her email there too, that you can reach out to her for your company or your organization as well. So thank you, Gabriele, for joining us in the dog days of summer to help put a little bit of a positive human spin on what project management really is about. And it's about managing people. And Peter, yes, we have recorded this. It will be on our YouTube channel. It will also be on our TEC Canada website, likely tomorrow. So thank you to everyone who joined us. And thank you, Gabriele. Take care.
Thank you so much.